Good morning, and thank you for joining Break the Norm Leadership for our latest interview. First and foremost, we like to thank Linda for taking her time and joining us for this discussion today. I look forward to having a robust conversation. So let's jump into it. What is your origin story? In other words, what personal or professional events or interactions foreshadowed and shaped the way that you're doing your work now and your approach to that work?
Well, just starting out, I think what first shapes my values is really all about where I grew up, how I grew up, and just that family foundational unit. And granted, we didn't have a lot, so it was based on respecting one another, just spending time with one another, and making fun out of really nothing, right? Like playing in the woods, playing basketball, and sports. And so that kind of started my overall journey. And I think having that the strength and the knowledge of you can come from not having a lot to really moving into the life that you want to build and the life that you want to have. And I also think that, going through adversities through my life, and not just my early life, but just in life in general, having been a sexual assault survivor, as well as overcoming homelessness, um, I think that that helps you to see things very differently. And there's always that fear that if I don't bring my best every single day, that I could end up, back in a place of, homelessness. I mean, I hate to say this, but everyone can end up there. You can be as rich as you want to be. There could be something that could lead you to be in that homeless space. And so I think for me, it is just taking stock of all of that and continuing to show up and do what I can with the tools that I have.
Wow. So in light of that and you sharing your experiences of being unhoused, surviving sexual abuse, and pretty much taking nothing and making something, would you consider that to be your superpower?
Um, I wouldn't I wouldn't consider that necessarily to be my superpower. I think, and it's funny because I've thought about this a lot, right? I think my superpower is being able to see what others don't, like being able to see the opportunities, being able to see through the complexities to something that can be very different. And I'm constantly, always thinking about, what's next, always thinking about, well, if this is a challenge, now is time to step into that challenge and think about how do we make really soup out of all the different components, right? So as you take all of that, you get all these different components and you've got to make this beautiful soup. And I think that that's my superpower. It's being able to do that and leaving people whole as we move into that space.
Mm. So I'm honing in on that piece of leaving people whole. So you talked about your journey, and your journey included overcoming some very personal challenges. And you mentioned that your goal of always to leave people whole. So in what ways has your personal story influenced how you lead others and how you approach mentorship?
Yeah, I think it makes me very sensitive to individuals that are trying to overcome challenges in their own life. It makes me sensitive to mothers, single parents, and individuals that are working, whether it's, three, four, five jobs to make ends meet, to have a better life for their children. I see that because I've been there. So I see that very clearly. And I know that that's, for many people, that's part of life. Um, it also allows me to try to find the hidden nuggets within individuals and prop them up in ways that others may not. And, I don't really focus in on you're a minority woman, you're a white woman, you're a white male or a black male. What I try to focus in on is however you're showing up and whatever you're coming to me with, how do I find the nuggets that allows you to see something different in yourself? And that's how I try to build teams. And that doesn't mean that I'm soft. It doesn't mean that I'm not really tough on individuals when I think they're not living to their full potential. I mean, I think that's maybe a challenge for me is that I will be very, very tough on individuals because I think that I can see the potential and they may not be able to see it, or they may not be willing to step into it, or they may be afraid to step into it. And so I hate to say that I'm trying to push them off that ledge. I'm trying to push them off that ledge in a good way.
Understood. So if I could, I guess, take your words and translate how I'm hearing it in my mind, you're like that mama bird who was like, "I know you can fly. I'm just gonna edge you out of this nest because I believe you're gonna spread your wings and soar. You believe that you're gonna go splat on the concrete, but I know that somewhere, something within you is gonna start flapping and
You
and,
know,
and you're gonna take off."
Tiffany, that is such a great example because in my, prior military life, right, I actually had a lot of troops that would say, they would go, there's Mama Singh, right? There's Mother Singh. There's, they would see me as that mother bird, right? And I still look at many of them today, and I am like the proud mother bird when I see individuals that have accomplished something and I look at them and I go and just think, 5 years ago, you were thinking you couldn't do this. And that gives me so much pleasure, probably even more than accomplishing things on my own. It's looking at how others are able to
Mm.
accomplish that.
Ah, okay. So you are that innate cheerleader. You are that person on the sidelines who's, egging everybody on to their best. So you kind of eked into my next question as to what advice would you give leaders who faced adversity along the way and how to transform those pains into strengths? And then what might be some of the things that would get in the way of those transformations?
Yeah. So first, when you encounter these challenges in life, it's only a challenge at that moment that you're in it. As soon as you get beyond it, it's no longer a challenge. It should be an opportunity for you to either reinvent, do something differently, try something differently. And so we shouldn't just focus on that moment because that moment is only going to last for that moment. And then you have to, kind of step beyond that and say, now, how do I leverage everything that I bring to the table to move forward? And in many cases, we've seen some of these challenges in different colors before, right? And so we have to think about that. So my advice is to don't focus on that moment. Focus in more on the journey that you're going to need to take to move through that. And you have to move through it, right? Like you can't go around it. You can't hop over it. You have to go through it because it's that experience that's going to make you stronger and more resilient for the next piece. Um, and then I think I just lost. What was the second part of your
Well,
question?
you talk about that transformation. You're mentioning the transformation and understanding that a challenge is just there for that moment in time, but it's key that you have to pass through it and get those experiences in order to keep growing and developing. So, what are some things that might get in the way of somebody as they're moving
Yeah.
through these challenges? Because the challenge is going to come.
Yeah.
And so, what might get in the way of a leader or a potential leader in not learning the lesson along the way during the challenge?
Yeah, I'm glad. So, because this one I think is extremely important is that we get in our own way. That's probably the biggest thing that I see is that we get into our heads and we stand in our own way and we become immobilized, like we can't do anything. We can't move. We get paralyzed. Um, and so we have to get out of our head. And a lot of times for me, it's talking it out, verbalizing that is a challenge, and then, actually saying to myself, well, what am I going to do about it? And so we have to get out of our own head and stop being our own kind of roadblock And I would say that that's like the biggest thing, right? Because we're afraid to take that leap. We're afraid to do whatever. We're afraid of failure. But
Mhm.
failure is another way to have an opportunity to move forward. And so I would say, just getting out of your own head and not being your own roadblock.
Okay, get out of your own head and don't be your own roadblock. So that's a good segue into my next question. What initially inspired you to join the Maryland Army National Guard? Like, what was going on in your life as a young person that made you, for lack using your own term, get out of your own way and say, you know what, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna enlist.
Yeah, this is the piece where opportunities present itself. And you may not think about it as an opportunity. Maybe you think about it as your escape plan. I happened to be working in the mall in Frederick. I had slept in our storeroom that night because I had to open. So I closed the shop and I had to open the shop. I worked at a little pretzel shop and I was homeless at the time, by the way. So it was just like a lot going on in my life. I didn't really know what was happening. I was 17. I had already dropped out of high school at that point because I was having to work to take care of myself and I wasn't doing that great of a job, but I wasn't doing that poor of a job, right? Because I was able to at least figure out ways to survive. And and it happened to be a recruiter who had only been a recruiter for um, he was only a recruiter in his whole career for about 6 months, and he was only there for a couple of months doing recruiting.
Mm,
And he stopped me that particular day and started talking to me about the Maryland National Guard, the Maryland Army National Guard. And I was just like, yeah, I'm not interested. When I came back by, he stopped me again. And I was like, I'm happy to sit down now and talk to you. And I was like, maybe this is my cue. Maybe that because this guy is being so persistent. I was like, maybe it is my opportunity to kind of look at this and see if it presents itself as for me to be able to have an escape plan. Because I think at that point I needed an escape plan. I hate to call it that. And it was taking that leap of faith and listening to him. I took the ASVAB test, which is the
mhm.
battery test that you need to do from the entrance portion, and scored well enough to be able to get a waiver to join the Maryland National Guard. And I'm not going to say it was all easy after that. I'm not going to say that it was perfect, but that gave me the opportunity, which started really my military career that ended up being a 38 plus year career.
Wow. So how did you go from being an unhoused 17-year-old working in a pretzel shop to becoming a general? And you said, it wasn't easy. And of course, I know, right, 38 years, that's a lot to try to kind of condense. But can you tell us a little bit about that journey from the 17-year-old girl working in the pretzel shop to General Singh?
Absolutely. I stayed enlisted for 11 years. So I started out as a private E1. Um, if it wasn't for, right at the time that I was, trying to think about, okay, maybe I want to be a warrant officer and I'm going to stay enlisted and maybe I go up through those ranks. I actually had a first sergeant who would sometimes, take me home from drill. I happened to be in the reserves at the time. So I switched from the guard to the reserves just because of location and being able to get back and forth to drill. And if it wasn't for this first sergeant having some conversations with me and then him asking me to do some additional work just to make some extra money working for the training and operations officer, those two individuals kind of really pushed me to think about becoming an officer. I had already gotten my high school diploma at that point. I was actually going and trying to do some college and I was working on my college degree. And if it wasn't for those individuals helping me to see, what could be different if I decided to go down the officer path? Because, I had a lot of, fits and starts. I had a lot of things that just didn't work. I tried to do a couple of different things. It was these two individuals that just looked at me and they said, you're going to make a better officer than you are an enlisted member because you like to tell people what to do and you like things to be very precise. And so they convinced me to look at those opportunities. And it was at that point that I decided, you know what, I'm going to do that. I looked at going to the officer candidate school, but I switched back to the Maryland National Guard to be able to do that. And I would have to say that, that was almost like, the start because I graduated from that program, working very, very hard, had no idea I was going to walk away with all the top leadership awards. And I think that gave me a very different view and gave leaders a very different view of Linda Singh. And that was my start of my officer career and went all the way up to becoming and getting the opportunity to lead the Maryland National Guard. And to me, I feel like that was full circle moment.
That is awesome. And so you talked about some of the fits and starts and all the different ways. How did you balance your military life, civilian life, and family life? Because being in the reserves and the guard is even a different experience than somebody who is full time in the military. So you were entrenched in trying to manage three very different worlds. You have military life, you had civilian life, and family life. How did you do it?
Yeah, and then you can add in their school life, right? Because I was also trying to go to
You were,
school, so I was
you were a
being a
student.
student, and it made it very, very difficult. And I would say that my oldest daughter, because I was married and then I got divorced, so I was a single parent. But when I went to OCS, I was a single parent, so I was like, you got to be, I'm crazy for doing this. I started dating my current husband. And I bring that up because being a single parent and trying to do all of that, I had to rely on friends and family
Mhm.
to help out. And when I say relying on friends and family to help out, one of my best girlfriends at the time would watch my daughter when I would go to drill. Her and her husband would watch my daughter because our kids were best friends, and so she would watch her at times when I had to go away from my officer basic course. I was just like, what am I going to do? Like, I'm a single parent. How am I going to make this happen? And it was my ex-mother-in-law who said,
Mhm.
send her down to me and I will take her for the school year. She said, we would love to have her. That to me is like
Mhm.
family stepping in and really, helping out. And as I was trying to build this dual career, my current husband and his family have been monumental in helping with my kids, taking care of, my family and wrapping their arms around them when I'm off on deployments or I'm off on travel, because I was building two very different careers, towards the end, being in a global consulting company and then, working in the military. And I'm talking two high powered careers.
Mhm.
It took really that family unit. And I have two beautiful daughters and an amazing husband. And if it wasn't for, just that family unit, I couldn't have done that. There's no way that I could have made it through all of that.
Wow. So you were really extolling the virtue and the power of the village.
Yes.
That the village helped to propel you forward. The village provided that safety net for you and your children and allowed you to have the peace of mind to know that you could focus on your military training, your executive leadership, because you knew that your children were well cared for.
Tiffany, and just something that you've
So
said, because
that
you said it
makes a
differently.
big
Yeah, is that village, right? Because I started with the village very early on, and then I built my own village, and now it's even a different village. And so everyone needs that village and that support. Everyone needs it.
absolutely. So you talked about the some of the challenges along the way. You talked about the power of the village. What were some of the unique challenges that you faced as an African American female leader in traditionally dominated male spaces like the military and corporate America? Because your company that you worked for previously, and doing a little bit of my research, was absolutely a big defense contractor. So how did you navigate that space as you?
Oh, wow. So I think one benefited the other, first off. Um, in that corporate environment, I had some amazing leaders that I worked with, male and female, that helped me to see the uniqueness in me. And I would say that it was probably even more males that helped
Hmm.
to see that, but I definitely had some female influence there. And what I loved about that consulting environment is that, they really were trying to push you to be your best self. And it didn't mean that, you were going to necessarily get all the top positions, but I had people who invested in me, that mentorship, that showing me how things could be different, showing me as a leader how my unique skills were important. And that really parlayed over into that military environment. And it helped me to be a better leader of all people. And then the leadership skills parlayed back over into that civilian environment. So I would have to say that those two things helped me to see how I could be a better version of myself. And it wasn't walking in and, because I walked into a lot of male dominated rooms, and it wasn't walking into that room and saying, I have to be just like the men. What I had to figure out is, how do I walk into that room and be me and be technically competent and capable and being seen as competent and capable in that space. That took work. That took working on myself. It also took courage, because sometimes when you step into that room, I hate to say it, but sometimes our male counterparts are just like, yeah, we're really good at this. And they may not be, right? Like, you may be better than them, but they sure as heck have this level of confidence. And you have to figure out, like, how do you do that and stay true to yourself?
You said a lot. One of the things that I'm honing in on that was very interesting, you said that in many ways it was male colleagues that really pushed you and challenged you. That was that what you were expecting, or were you surprised by that?
Well, I mean, there were, at those times as I was coming up, there were very few females. And when I
Mm,
started seeing more female leadership, I gravitated towards that, right? But everybody was gravitating towards them because there weren't that many of them. And there are some pretty remarkable women that I've worked with, and some I'm still very good friends with, because I felt like they emulated everything that I wanted to be as a woman leader. They had family, they had, that personal life, they had the education. And it wasn't that I wanted to be them, but
mm,
they basically helped me to see that it's possible that you can survive and thrive in an
mm.
environment that looks nothing like you.
You can thrive because, like, surviving is one thing, but you can thrive in an environment where there's not necessarily anybody who looks like you. You touched on some of the symbiotic relationship between your military career and your civilian career, and how they benefited one another, and how you took bits and pieces going, from each to propel you forward in both. So thank you for laying that out for our viewers. So now, and for those of you who may not know, in addition to being a corporate executive, a military general, Linda is also a movie star. Let's talk a little bit about War Game. How did you get involved in this project, and what was your role? Well, first of all, let's tell the viewers what War Game is if they don't know.
So War Game is a documentary about a war game that was done, in January 2023. that focused in on what if another January 6th like event occurred and the military was divided, right? And that's really kind of what the scenario was. And so all of us that were in the documentary, we were actually participants in this war game exercise. The documentary came out of that. And so it was not scripted. It was really focused on, hopefully being able to see, what are the different types of decisions and the powers and the process for having better decision making when we're in these really challenging situations. And keep in mind, we had no idea who the candidates were going to be, even
Mhm.
though we were focusing on what if another January 6th like event occurred. You can really, what I would say is that if you are able to watch War Game, because you can now watch it on video on demand, um, what you should be taking away from it is how those big critical decisions are made in those very high level rooms with information that may be imperfect, with little information, and really people leveraging and bringing together the skills and background that they have and that experience. And that is critical. It's crucial for people to understand our democratic process and realizing that it's not one person. It has to be a combination of individuals that helps to lead this forward.
Wow, that was definitely timely at the point that you all did it, and I'm glad that somebody had the wherewithal to capture that and show it to the American public. It's something that people who are in the military, who work in defense, who work in intelligence, is something that we will be exposed to, but that the masses aren't. And so, thank you for taking that time to explain to people kind of what happens behind those closed doors. um, I'm a huge fan of Hamilton, and so like when they talk about in the room where it happened, and basically this kind of gives people a peek
Yeah.
into the room where it happens. So as a female leader, you were in that space, and you were able to be in the room where it happens, and to be able to lend your unique lens and your point of view. So, what strengths do you think that women bring to leadership? Unique strengths that we as women would bring to leadership, and how can organizations help to better support and elevate women to make sure that women are in the room where it happens?
Yeah, I think that is such a great question. And what I because I'm an individual who I've had a lot of male leaders that worked for me, tons, and had trouble finding the female leaders. Now that I've had the opportunity to work with tons of female leaders, the thing that I want people to take away is that gender does not define leadership abilities. Leadership abilities are true to the individual, and that happens whether you're a male or female. Now, what I've seen different for women is because we have to balance so many different things in our lives that we're really good at doing that. And we shouldn't have to necessarily pick one over another, but we're really good at bringing some sense of order to chaos. And
Mm.
that is a skill that goes across many organizations that can be leveraged and used. And it's not, I don't want to put it equivalent to multitasking. This is
Mm.
about, being able to see and sift through all of these pieces and to deal with the pieces that are coming up at that moment and moving forward, right? Moving that team forward. Women are really good at doing that. And that's not saying that men, some men aren't. I'm just saying that that's an ability that women have and seem to bring it to the forefront a whole lot more.
The ability to wade through the chaos and really hone in on what's important, what matters. Because, like you said, multitasking is one thing. I can be doing a lot of stuff at one time, but if what I'm doing is not consequential, then I'm just really busy. But if I am able to hone in, push aside what's not super important in this moment, and focus in on the consequential issues, the things that are going to make a difference, And that's some of that skill set. Okay, so would you say that there are any even more unique skills or experiences just because of the nature of experiences that women of color may bring to the table just because of our various experiences in America?
Yeah, so what I see a lot from our women of color is this level of resilience.
Mm,
Many of them have been at the bottom and they've worked so hard to move up. And that level of resiliency, that has to be inbred into all of our young people, right? Like to me, that's a superpower. Every
mm,
single woman that has had to build that from scratch, that's your superpower. That should be part of it. And being resilient at times, sometimes I have to step in and be a mother and things may be chaos at home, but I'm going to bring, order to that. And sometimes I have to step into that personal side of things and it's not all going to be perfect. And sometimes it just all falls apart. And then you've got to bring it all back together. It's that level of resilience that I think is very different for our women of color. And many times that's born out of those very challenging experiences. They have this toughness. And, there are times in which, we are seen as the bees, right?
mhm,
Um, and sometimes that probably fits. However, don't confuse that level of resiliency, being persistent, being very assertive with just being someone that is so negative. And I think we constantly
mhm,
use those words, oh, you're too aggressive, but yet they're assertive. And if I said it to a male, I'd be saying they're assertive instead of aggressive. And it's the same thing, and you look at them in the same place, but it's only because of who it's coming from. And so to me, resiliency, this level of just being persistent and having this strength to drive forward and just know, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I think is it's just different. It comes from a different place.
that you're giving some very sage advice about um, being aware of the labels and how different, like how the same behavior can show up in a different face and then receive a different label. So, and I think it's very important to understand that, you may be labeled, but recognize that your behavior isn't necessarily problematic because somebody else said that it is. What advice would you give to young women who are just starting out in their careers? In addition to that is sage advice about being careful about the way people label you. But what else would you say?
For young women starting out in your career now, you need to start getting a good sense of who you are and where you want to go.
Mhm,
Don't sugarcoat it. Don't hum and ha and say, well, maybe. No, you really start need to honing in on who you want to be. Who do you want to show up as? And you may not be that person today, but have that vision and know that's where you want to go. And then start working on the pieces to move down that path to become that person that you envision. And don't look at, I want to be, this star or that star. Boil it down to what are the attributes and what are those attributes that you need to develop to become that person. I
mhm,
think that's important. And you need to drive into that uniqueness, right? I know that, when people see me and they would see me in uniform, I would have this one view, oh my God, she's kind of scary in this uniform, right? And then they would see me in civilian clothes and they wouldn't even know who I was. Like I still get that today. People see me and they're like, oh my God, you're General Singh, aren't you? Right? And they look at me completely different because I have this flair and I've allowed that flair to come through and I'm not apologizing for it.
mm,
If I want to wear the bright whatever colors, I couldn't do that for many years in my career. Now I'm running
mhm,
my own company. I am everything the opposite of, because that's what I want it to be. And so I've envisioned it, I've created it, and that's what young people need to do.
That's powerful, and absolutely here at Break the Norm, we believe that leadership is for everybody, and we believe in development. One of the ways that we have been able to I'm really leaning into what you said because I believe it. I believe it. I live it out. And one of the ways that we have been able to do that is through some of our teaching and some of our coaching, where there's a lot of power in being able to work with somebody and to ask them powerful questions to help them hone what their values are and then their vision for themselves. Because a lot of people a lot of people have a dream. They just are scared to actually articulate it or say it's a dream or don't know how to start working towards it. And so that's a lot of power of coaching and mentoring. And that's why leadership matters, having leaders who are able to speak into you, as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, that you could see things in people that they couldn't see in themselves. And so it's that mashup of being that encourager, of working with people, of coaching them, of helping to hone those skills to get them ready and to help them to develop a vision for their lives that's based on their values and their unique skills that they bring, just as a person, because everybody has something. And so you talked about resiliency a little bit earlier. And so I want to lean into that a little bit more because in order to live out our values and figure out how we want to show up and what we want to accomplish, we have to be whole and we have to know how to navigate the vicissitudes of life. And so you wrote a book entitled Moments of Choice: My Path to Leadership. Can you tell me about how you learned how to make positive choices in the face of adversity and how those choices propelled you forward in life? You touched on it when you talked about talking to that recruiter at the pretzel stand. So what were some other ways that your resiliency that you leaned for, you looked at what would look like a bad situation, but you made good decisions and moved forward?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a number of ways, and it's great because looking at the book and telling the story from, having already gone through it and then being able to highlight those things is very different. I would say that, now when I think about how challenging things are, and for a small business, we just got our 8A certification earlier this year. That's a very challenging process, right? Like just taking it one step at a time, focusing in on this is my 60-meter target, and you'll get this because from a military perspective, right?
Mhm,
Focusing in on what that 60-meter target is and hitting that target, and then now moving to that 100-meter target.
mhm,
Um, that has been crucial for me to be able to do that at every moment. And realizing that if the problem is really big, if it's an elephant, I can't attack the elephant because it's way too big. I can't eat the whole elephant because it's way too big. But if I focus in on just the toenail or just the trunk or just the ear, it's a little bit more manageable. And so breaking it down into smaller, more manageable pieces and kind of continuing to move down that path and celebrating the small successes.
mhm,
Um, I think that that is so important. Sometimes we wait to get to that big goal, and that might be 10 years off. And what are we going to
mm,
do? We're not going to celebrate for 10 years. We're going to get discouraged. And so you have to break it down into smaller pieces and just think about if I can, make steps 1, 2, and 3 work, I'm going to celebrate. And then I'm going to hit steps 4, 5, and 6,
mm,
celebrate that. And then when I hit the big goal, that's the mammoth celebration, right? Like that's the party down. And you really do need to celebrate. And that celebration doesn't have to be a big party or whatever. It can be, going out to dinner. It could be buying yourself something special. It could be just, highlighting and recognizing that and telling that story and let everybody else celebrate you as well.
that is very sage advice. And I think that those personal celebrations are absolutely part of building your resilience. Because if you're always just push, 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 you never give yourself a chance to rest or to step back and to revel in what you've actually accomplished. So I thank you for giving that sage advice to folks as well. It's also important for your spirit, because if you always feel like you're just on an uphill battle, like at some point you got to get to the top of the hill.
Yeah.
You- and you
Yes.
you have to give yourself that ability to stop, take a minute, look around, and see what you have accomplished. It's very important to be able to take that stock. So along those same lines, we talked about resiliency. You talked about learning how to celebrate those small successes along the way to the grand victory. What were some other ways that you learned to protect your mental health and to, build up your resiliency, particularly like here in day-to-day life, but especially when you were in really tough situations like deployments?
Yeah. So the first thing is it's okay to cry. Right? It's okay to have that level of emotion and let it hit you and feel it. And then, just let it happen. Don't fight it, don't resist it. Um, that to me is the first piece. And I know, people say, "Oh my God, you're a general, so generals don't cry." No, we cry. And it's having that level of vulnerableness to be
Mm,
able to sometimes even show it, I think is important. The next piece in terms of protecting that mental piece is you have to have your happy place, and you need to know what that happy place is. Um, for me during deployments, it was being able to listen to music. Um, yes, talking to my family and being able to getting to talk to them. But when you're alone in those moments, and while
mm,
yes, you're with a bunch of other people, but it can be a very lonely place. Music was always a way for me to tie back to the things that were so fundamentally precious to me because I grew up on music, um, prayer, and faith,
mm,
and being able to just get up in the morning, every morning before I would go out and do my runs or my exercise or get started for the day, I'd say a little prayer. And that little prayer was, God, just help me be present today, help me be aware and help me make it through whatever I'm going to face, whatever that day brings. And then the last piece of it is having this physical, mental, I like to walk, I like to exercise, I like to just listen to audiobooks. That's become, for especially right now, since my mind is constantly going with business and there's so much going on in the world. I actually listen to audiobooks. So when I get in the car, I may listen to music. I'm not listening to the news because it's just so much to process. Audiobooks is a way for me to be someplace else and just helps me to think differently. It helps me to relax my mind. And I know people go, "Well,
mm,
can't, how do you drive and do that?" I'm still very aware. It's just allowing me to listen to something differently. And it's actually helped to refine my listening skills, which I think is great.
mm,
And so you really have to figure out, like, how do you find that sense of peace
mm,
regardless of what's going on around you. And I know that even with, all the other events, to me, this whole election thing was very stressful. And I just kind of let it happen. And the next day I go, okay, now it's over. Now we got to get on and move on with business. That's just it, right? I'm not going to let it build up anxiety in me. I'm not going to let others build up anxiety in me. It's just, we have to move on. And so now I'm just like, okay, now it's the next day and we got to get back to business. Um, and so you have to take that moment. I took that moment to be like, okay, it's done. Now let's move. And I think we all need to do that.
Well, thank you so much for all of your insights and your sharing, especially about the resiliency, the mental health. And we're gonna come in, we're gonna land the plane. So just out of curiosity, what book are you listening to right now?
Actually, you're gonna be like, "Oh, you're crazy." I am listening to, and I'll tell you here in a minute. I should know the name of it, but I am listening to Double Cross, which is actually it's a Alex Cross. It's the Alex Cross series by James Patterson.
Okay.
And so I love these murder mysteries, law enforcement. I know I'm crazy. I'm really, that just drives me like Law and Order, all of those types of shows just really
Mhm.
get me going. And I was telling some of my police officer friends, I said it's really crazy because I've been doing a whole series of James Patterson, his women murders, and now this Alex Cross series, which oh by the way is getting ready to come on TV, which I can't wait. And another series. I go walking down my neighborhood and I'm looking around. So I'm not real sure it's always the right thing to do, but I really enjoy those. And it just, I can't stop, right? It's just like something that gets me going. And so I have tons of authors that I like. That's not the only one. That just happens to be what I'm listening to
That's
today.
the latest. Well, thank you so much for sharing about your journey. We talked about some heavy things along the way. We talked about your experience in being a sexual abuse survivor. We talked about being an unhoused teenager. You talked about your military career, your executive career, ways that you maintain your resiliency, your mental health. You've given advice to others coming up behind you, and just some of your insights. So thank you so much for that time and that wisdom. And hopefully somebody somewhere will see this conversation, even if they don't have that village right there around them. This message will inspire them to look around and see who can be that village for them, and more importantly, to see how they can show up for others as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate the time.
So thank you so much. So I think I'm going to turn it to Rachel. I think we might cut the recording and then wrap up.